Sidekick is basically the story of the British-American relationship, which started after the Second World War. It's called the Special Relationship, and it's how it evolved, why it started, how it evolved, and how Britain has got itself into a very close relationship with America, which I argue in the book is not in Britain's interest. It's in Britain's interest to have a good relationship with the United States, and a healthy relationship, but not a dependent relationship, where we're too close and we tend to do everything the Americans ask us, of which the best example of that, of course, is the war in Iraq, which is, the war in Iraq was a almost perfect example of the special relationship in action. So this book is an attempt to explain how we got into this position as a country. Well, I think this book is highly relevant now and highly topical because we're having a change of government in Britain from Tony Blair to Gordon Brown. And that we've had 10 years of Tony Blair. Tony Blair, like other British Prime Ministers before him, but more so, was a great advocate of the special relationship. And his close personal relationship with George Bush was always a mystery to many people, but I try and explain in this book how it occurred. So Tony Blair, at the end of his premiership, is a good chance to review the special relationship. It's always a good chance to look at Britain's foreign policy when you have a new Prime Minister. So we can look back over the 10 years of Tony Blair, see the close relationship which led up to the war in Iraq, and now look at a new premiership and see whether this new premiership of Gordon Brown's and who may come after him is going to change anything, or whether we're going to continue in the same sidekick relationship, as I call it, to the United States that we've always had. Right. Well, I outlined three options for Britain. One is to work more closely with the European Union in the integration process that's going on, and to turn ourselves basically into a European power, working with Germany and France to secure a future. The alternative to that is if we turn our back on Europe, which we still may do, I say in the book, then we will sink further, in my view, into the American empire and become a sidekick really forever. Our relationship with America will become more and more dependent, and we will then be expected to take part in global activities which are in the Americans' interest. Iraq is an example of that, Korea before it, rather than develop foreign policy in our interest. So that's a future if we turn our back on Europe. And then there's a third future possible for Britain, which again I outline at the end, which is that we say no to America because we've got fed up with the Iraq imbroglio. We distance ourselves from the United States, but we don't get closer to Europe. In fact, we reject both of them, and we develop what I call a sort of Little England mentality, where we think we can go it alone in the world. And I personally reject that. I think that is not a future for us. But in terms of the future, what I'm basically arguing is that the sidekick strategy of Britain's political leaders, and particularly Tony Blair, Britain's role being a sidekick to the United States, may now be coming to an end, and we may begin now to see a future post-Iraq in which the Americans are withdrawing somewhat from the world, not completely but somewhat. Europe is beginning to grow now with a strong economy, that our sidekick history and strategy may be coming to an end. But no one can ever tell the future, and I wouldn't like to say whether we're going to opt as a country for a stronger relationship with Europe or continuing the sidekick strategy. The more I look at this, the more I look at the history of this country since the Second World War, the more I'm clear that what we've basically done, the leadership of this country, not the people, because I don't think the people tend to get involved in foreign policy very much. This is run by elites. that the elite strategy in Britain since the war has been to try and maintain some global role for Britain, to punch above its weight, and that the only way they thought we could do this was by cleaving very close to Washington. And that was the strategy. But at the end of the Cold War, of course, the Cold War arguably ended in 1989. We've now been 15 years into the post-Cold War era. We don't need the United States now to defend us as much. We can do it ourselves with our European allies. And so I really think this is a chance to establish a proper relationship across the Atlantic. And one final thing. This is not an anti-American book. Often anyone who attacks the special relationship, as I do in this book, or argue that it's wrong, people say it's anti-American. It's not. I want a healthy relationship with the United States, and a better relationship, and you can only really have a good relationship amongst equals, really. And we've got ourselves into a situation where we were junior partners, and if we have a more European policy and can establish an equal relationship between Europe and the United States, I think that's much healthier for transatlantic relations. But it's all to play for, and this book, therefore, I think comes out at a very interesting